In this video, I will discuss the platform business model. Now, I believe it is important to have a good understanding of platforms, given the sheer number of firms that either operates as a platform or operates in a platform. Also, the amount of value that is being created by the platform economy is just surreal. For example, did you know that over 70% of all unicorns or startups that are valued over $1 billion operates the platform business model? Moreover, the combined market capitalization of GAFA, or Google, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon, now exceeds $4 trillion. These companies build much of their riches on top of very powerful and successful digital platforms. And it's not just the amount of value, also the economics behind platforms are different from those of traditional businesses. In 2014, Professor Jean Tirole was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics, in part for his groundbreaking research on two-sided markets or two-sided platforms. So in this video, I will discuss 4 elements for successfully managing the platform business model. And I will do so by drawing from well-known examples in practice and research. Let's get right to it. The video is structured as follows. I will start by briefly talking about how researchers have defined platforms and why we need an academic study of platforms. Once we've covered that, I will talk about the 4 elements of successfully managing the platform business model. These are network effects and their implications, platform ecosystems and corporate scope, platform complement and user heterogeneity, and platform governance and ecosystem orchestration. I will end by offering some future research recommendations and some concluding remarks. The contents in this video broadly draw from my research on platforms and platform competition. I have been doing research in this space for more than 10 years now, and I have looked at various aspects of platforms, mostly in the context of different gaming platforms, such as Steam, the iOS App Store, and several home video game consoles. But I've also looked at other sectors, including crowdfunding and microfinance. More specifically, however, in my talk today, I will draw from a recent research paper that I did together with my friend and mentor, Melissa Schilling at New York University. Melissa and I took stock of the academic literature on platforms, and we summarized and synthesized findings across the fields of economics, management, information systems, and marketing. We analyzed more than 300 academic articles to arrive at the 4 themes and elements that I will be presenting today. This project was a real labor of love. Two or multi-sided platforms facilitate transactions and govern interactions between 2 or more distinct customer groups who are connected via an indirect network effect. Thus, to qualify as a platform, a firm must have 2 or more distinct customer groups that value each other's presence on the platform, but experience difficulties either finding each other or letting the market decide on a price in the absence of the platform. Platforms therefore create value by reducing search costs or by reducing transaction costs, or by doing both. Examples include Apple's iOS App Store, where app developers are complementors and iPhone users are end users. Or Facebook, where advertisers are complementors and users like you and me are the end users. Or Kiva's microfinancing platform, where microfinance institutions or Kiva field partners are complementors and retail lenders making small loans are end users. Or video game consoles, such as Sony's PlayStation, where game developers are the complementors and gamers are the end users. I will cover all of these examples during my talk. In all these cases, the platform connects the 2 sides of the market and makes sure that they can transact with each other via the platform. One implication is that many platforms are in fact rather useless without having both sides of the market joining the platform. Why study platforms? Well, platforms are a very important topic because many firms today operate the platform business model. As I mentioned at the top of the video, more than 70% of all unicorns or startups valued over $1 billion operate the platform business model. And the GAFAs, or Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apples of the world, largely determine how we interact with other people and also create significant economic value. These companies do so by operating powerful digital platforms. Moreover, there is increasing interest from policymakers in these platforms, as concerns over anti-competitive behavior are mounting. In short, there is a lot to do about platforms nowadays. The literature on platforms dates back to the 1980s. The literature has its origins in economics, where scholars realized that the economics of multi-sided platform markets are different from those of traditional markets. Besides economics, platform competition has increasingly gained attention from scholars in management and organizations, information systems, and marketing. Our review of these 333 academic articles uncovered 4 conceptual themes of interest to platform competition scholars and practitioners across the fields of economics, management and organizations, information systems, and marketing. These themes reflect the various issues that platform sponsors, or the firms commercializing platform business models, must take into account for successfully operating the platform business model. I will now briefly discuss these 4 elements and how they apply in practice. 4 elements of successfully managing the platform business model. The first theme that we identified is also the earliest theme in the literature. This theme looks at how network effects between complementors and end users can create winner-take-all dynamics and have implications for the platform's pricing. On the one hand, platforms face a chicken or the egg problem. Without complementors such as game developers, end users such as gamers generally won't be interested in joining a platform, and the reverse is also true. Platforms must therefore try to get both customer groups on board without there being a particularly strong incentive for either side to do so. On the other hand, however, in the presence of strong network effects, a platform that enters the market early can end up dominating the entire market if it manages to attain some early success. Network effects can lock users in and prevent them from joining a competing platform, even if that platform is objectively better. This has implications for pricing on both sides of the market. Network effects create strong incentives to subsidize one side of the market, typically the side with the least interest in having users on the other side join, and then monetize the other side of the market. Think, for example, Facebook, where users can join and use the platform free of charge, while advertisers are charged a hefty fee for advertising their services or products on the platform. Platforms are also incentivized to engage in penetration pricing. By incurring some losses early in the platform's life, the platform increases its chances of attracting users and becoming dominant later in the platform's life. So these subsidies early will likely pay themselves back later in the platform's life cycle, when the platform can safely increase its prices without the loss of users. Video game consoles are a perfect example of how dynamic pricing in platform markets works. In 2010, Shuhei Yoshida at Sony Worldwide Studios admitted that that was the first year the company was finally making a little bit of profit on every PlayStation 3 console that the company sold. This was more than 3 years after the console's initial market launch. The reason for this is that Sony sold the console at a loss in its early years, so as to quickly ramp up its gamer base to make the platform more attractive to game developers. Sony earned its money by demanding a revenue share on every game sold on the platform, and this could largely offset some of the losses on the consumer side. In the graph here, we also see that Sony kept dropping the price for its console, and yet it was finally able to make a profit from selling it. This can be explained by the decreasing cost of sourcing the technology embedded in the console, such as the expensive graphics chips. In the end, Sony decreased the price for consumers less relatively to the drop in the cost of the technology. It could afford to do this by 2010 because the platform had enough games and gamers to justify a relatively higher price. The platform's network value, if you will, had increased in addition to the platform's standalone value. As an aside, it has been reported that NASA has bought a whole bunch of PlayStation 3 consoles shortly after the console's launch, because apparently it was at the time the cheapest way to get hold of such powerful processing and computing power and technology. The second element for successfully managing the platform business model is platform ecosystems and corporate scope. Generally, platforms allow for greater specialization among firms. If one firm develops the operating system, for example, and thousands of smaller other firms develop software functionality, all firms in the ecosystem can focus on what they do best. That being said, we do increasingly see that platforms broaden their scope of activities, especially when they become more dominant in their respective markets. Platform firms might want to increase their scope if certain functionality poses a bottleneck to the ecosystem or is particularly valued by end users. Microsoft did this when it felt that third-party internet browsers such as Netscape were becoming too valuable for the Windows ecosystem. Microsoft introduced the Internet Explorer to counter this concern. Platforms can also use scope decisions to increase the chances of success for the overall ecosystem. For example, early in a platform's life, when few complementors see value in joining a platform, the platform might decide to produce some of its own complementary goods to jumpstart the ecosystem and attract more end users. Again, Microsoft did this and is still doing this with its Xbox video game console. Prior to entering the market, Microsoft acquired a number of game developers, such as Bungie, to ensure that it had a sufficient number of launch games available that were also unique to the Xbox brand, such as Halo. Recently, Microsoft engaged in one of the largest acquisitions in the video games industry to date, when it announced that it will be buying ZeniMax Media for $7.5 billion US. This acquisition gives Microsoft access to such hit properties as The Elder Scrolls, Fallout, and Doom, and it will help the platform to further improve the appeal of its Xbox Game Pass subscription service. Finally, platforms should carefully manage their boundaries over time. Platforms must be careful not to impede complementors' market space too much, especially in the early stages of the platform's life, when the platform's bargaining position is still relatively weak. Later, however, platforms can afford to act a bit more bullish and might decide to offer an increasing amount of complement functionality itself. We see these dynamics play out in other platforms, such as Amazon and Apple's App Store. One of my favorite examples in this regard is the Apple iOS flashlight functionality. Nowadays, we are all used to having flashlight functionality embedded in our smartphones, but it wasn't always like that. At some point, there were more than 1,000 flashlight apps and app developers on the iOS App Store. These developers made a living from selling their apps or selling advertising space within their apps. Then, from one day to the next, Apple decided that it would be better to absorb flashlight functionality into the iOS operating system. By doing so, Apple essentially put these developers out of business virtually overnight. And the flashlight example isn't an isolated event either. As this quote illustrates, the industry even has a term for when Apple steals an idea. It's called getting Sherlocked. This harks back to when Apple's desktop search tool called Sherlock borrowed many of the features of a third-party companion tool called Watson. And Steve Jobs and Apple are not shy about stealing good ideas either. Steve Jobs once said, "We have always been shameless about stealing great ideas." From a consumer perspective, this might be good because we are receiving more and better functionality as part of the base platform. But clearly, from a developer's perspective, this isn't something to be particularly happy about. The third element of successfully managing the platform business model revolves around heterogeneity of platforms and its users. Platforms must realize and act on the notion that more of complementers and more of end users isn't necessarily always better. There exist important differences between complementers and end users that the platform must take into account, as these differences can determine or affect the strength of network effects. On the complementer side, for example, research has shown time and again that the platform owner should not exclusively focus on getting more complements to join, but rather focus on attracting high-quality complements that are exclusive to the platform, and complements or complementors that are considered superstars or blockbusters. Apple, for example, allegedly paid $50 million to have EA's game Plants vs. Zombies 2 as a timed exclusive on the iOS App Store. The assumption here is that having such a title will create stronger network effects than having a regular title that is available on multiple platforms. On the end user side, there also exist important differences that affect the attractiveness of the overall ecosystem and affect which complements are most likely to perform well. My own research has shown that early adopters of a platform search differently and have different preferences for complements than late adopters of a platform. This affects then which complements are likely to sell well and when, but it's also affecting how the overall value in the ecosystem will be distributed across individual complementors. For example, a hardcore gamer might buy a new gaming console soon after it is released and will likely also buy lots of games for it. A more casual gamer, however, such as my mother, might only buy a console after its true quality has been revealed, and they might only buy one or a few games to play with it. In my mother's case, this is SingStar, and every time I go home for Christmas, I'm cajoled into playing karaoke with her and my brother. Research has further shown that when end users are tightly clustered, for example because they live nearby or have strong shared interests, network effects tend to be stronger than when the network of end users is less tightly clustered or more diffuse. As an example of how network structure matters, Facebook started out in 2004 as The Facebook, initially as an online yearbook for Harvard students and later other US college students, before adding additional functionality and moving into adjacent markets and interactions. I believe this was a very smart move. By starting out with a very narrow scope, Facebook ensured that its offering was of particularly high value to a very specific target audience, namely Harvard college students. Moreover, by only allowing Harvard students to sign up, who potentially already knew each other and were likely rather similar in terms of their backgrounds, Facebook ensured a coherent and tightly clustered network. This will have very likely created very strong network effects and much stronger network effects than if it had opened up the platform to a much broader audience from the very start. The fourth and final theme is also the most recent theme to emerge from the literature on platform competition. The theme is platform governance and orchestration. This theme looks at how platforms set rules to govern and orchestrate their ecosystems. Someone needs to decide on the rules for a platform ecosystem, and the platform sponsor or the firm or firms that commercialize a platform are typically in the best position to do so. Now, to be clear, some of the things I covered earlier, such as pricing, vertical integration, and attracting the right type of users, all belong to the domain of platform governance. It's only recently, however, that people started to group these under the umbrella of platform governance. In deciding on governance rules, the platform owner must make some challenging trade-offs. Some rules might benefit the platform sponsor more than it does complementers, for example. And while this may be good in the short term, it can harm the ecosystem's chances of survival in the long run. One example is Apple's integration of third-party app functionality in the iOS operating system, including the flashlight example that we discussed earlier. If Apple does these acts of absorption or vertical integration too extensively, app developers might decide to leave the platform or stop making apps for it. It might even deter new app developers from joining the platform altogether. Platforms can also steer the ecosystem and reward complementers by engaging in selective promotion of complements. Examples of this include Kickstarter's Projects We Love, Apple's Editor's Picks, and eBay's badges for top-rated sellers. Such selective promotion brings prominence to the promoted complement or complementor. It brings increased demand from end users, and it can send a powerful signal about which products or product categories the platform deems important. My research with Melissa shows that platforms are more likely to promote the up-and-coming complementers rather than those at the very top of the market, in order to avoid those complementers becoming too powerful. We also find that they are more likely to promote complements with high quality and those that are exclusive on one platform. That platform governance rules and selective promotions of complementers can have a very tangible effect is nicely illustrated by the example of Kiva's microfinancing platform. Kiva is a non-profit organization with the global mission of alleviating poverty. It does this by creating a platform where retail lenders can make small loans or microloans to borrowers that are mostly located in developing countries. Borrowers' their loan projects are sourced and offered and managed by a microfinance institution, also known as a Kiva field partner. In 2011, Kiva introduced a badging system where some of these field partners were rewarded for offering loans that specifically contributed to some social good, such as empowering communities or stimulating entrepreneurship. One of these badges rewards field partners for offering loans by female borrowers. Since female borrowers tend to reinvest their capital gains into their families, thus creating positive spillovers. Together with my co-authors Rob Siemens and Katja Megiorin, I studied what happened after a field partner received such a badge. And we found that compared to field partners that did not receive this badge, badged field partners increased their share of female borrowers on the platform by 2.6 to 6.1 percentage points per quarter. In other words, these firms adjusted their behavior and their portfolio of loans along the focus area of the badge they received from the platform. By implementing rules and promoting certain complementary firms, platforms can thus have a very real impact on these firms' behavior and performance on the platform. Concluding remarks. While we already know a lot about platforms and why it is that most platforms fail and only some in the end succeed, there is still a lot to learn. We have identified several areas for future research, some of which that are listed here. Generally, we need more interdisciplinary research, more studies that pull data from multiple empirical contexts, more qualitative research, greater engagement with existing theories, and less research on apps and video games. I say that tongue-in-cheek. We also identify several opportunities for future research within each of the 4 themes. In the first theme, it would be great if scholars developed dynamic models for platform pricing that take into account network effects and the platform's current market position. It will also be good to identify strategies for dethroning digital dominance, such as the likes of Amazon, Google, and Facebook. In the second theme, we need much more clarity on the effects of platforms competing with complementors and their boundary conditions. Some of the studies we've looked at found positive effects, whereas others found negative effects. Moreover, platforms' horizontal scope has been largely neglected in the literature to date. In the third theme, we need a better understanding if platforms can actually design for network effects. Network effects are typically assumed to exist at the market level, but we expect that product and design features can affect the scope of network effects. Global strategy scholars should look at complementors' launch strategies across geographical markets and their effects on performance. Finally, in the fourth theme, it would be good if we could zoom out and apply a more dynamic or holistic perspective on platform governance. Also, it's becoming increasingly clear that platforms aren't all gravy. We should proactively investigate the dark side of platforms, if you will. So I'll offer some loose thoughts to conclude the talk with. I think these are really promising and challenging times for platforms and their sponsoring firms. They are promising because platforms continue to defy the frontiers of innovation and user experience every single day. On the other hand, they are challenging because more than ever, platforms are being scrutinized, both from the inside and from the outside. Successfully managing a platform ecosystem, as I have discussed in this video, requires a different set of strategic tools and insights than managing traditional businesses. This means that we have to look at platforms through a different lens than we do at more traditional businesses. In so doing, I have identified 4 elements of successful platforms: network effects and their implications, platform ecosystems and corporate scope, heterogeneity of platforms, consumers, and complementors, and platform governance and orchestration. That said, there is still so much we don't know yet, and even with these 4 guideposts, it remains incredibly difficult to attain success as a starting platform, let alone emulate the success of existing market leaders such as the likes of Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Apple. As noted at the top of my video, the findings that I presented today are based on an extensive literature review that is now forthcoming in the Journal of Management. If you'd like to know more, you can grab a preprint from SSRN, or you can download the open access version directly from the publisher. I've also created a companion website where you can browse all the papers included in the literature review and where I keep adding new papers on platform strategy as they become available. The website is platformpapers.com. On this website, you can also inspect various data visualizations, such as the one here that shows how the papers are distributed across the 4 themes within each field. It might be a handy resource if you'd like to further your understanding on platforms and platform strategy. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video.